What if I told you that several countries once deeply aligned with the United States are now shifting their loyalty toward Canada? In 2025, a quiet revolution is taking place. Trade deals, military partnerships, even cultural exchanges are heading north. Why? What's driving this diplomatic exodus? And which nations are making the switch? Stay tuned, because today we uncover the 5 countries ditching the US for Canada in 2025 and the reasons behind their surprising pivot. Before we dive into the list, here's how we chose these 5 countries. We looked at recent shifts in foreign policy, trade statistics, military realignment, visa agreements, and public opinion polls. This isn't just about politicians. It's about where businesses, people, and governments are now placing their trust, and that spotlight is increasingly on Canada. Number 5. Mexico's growing pivot from the United States toward Canada in 2025 is rooted in economics, migration policy, and political respect. For decades, the U.S. was Mexico's dominant trade and security partner, but increasing border tensions, labor disputes, and political rhetoric have strained the relationship. Canada, meanwhile, has approached Mexico with respect and partnership. The Canada-Mexico Economic Forum launched this year, focusing on shared growth, worker rights, and green energy. Over 25 Canadian companies have shifted operations from China to Mexico under nearshoring strategies. Canada now imports more agricultural goods from Mexico than ever before, surpassing some U.S. categories. Mexican workers are benefiting from safer, regulated migration to Canada's seasonal labor programs. Unlike the U.S., Canada expanded visa access for Mexican skilled workers and students. Mexican universities now have 80-plus exchange agreements with Canadian institutions. Canada's support for Indigenous rights resonates with Mexico's own cultural revival. Joint cultural festivals and art exchanges are strengthening soft power links. Canada contributed significantly to Mexico's climate resilience efforts post-2024 hurricane season. Mexican public opinion now views Canada as a more trustworthy nation than the U.S., with a 68% approval rating. Canadian officials openly criticized U.S. border militarization, winning praise in Mexican media. A trilateral trade model is emerging, but Mexico sees Canada as the more reliable side. Mexico City and Ottawa now co-lead the North American Sustainability Pact. Canadian tourism to Mexico has recovered faster post-COVID than U.S. visitors. Canada supported Mexico's plan to legalize and regulate certain labor sectors, unlike Washington's resistance. Mexican diplomats cite Canada's respectfulness and humility in global forums. Canada's support for cultural preservation in Chiapas and Oaxaca is widely appreciated. Mexican tech startups are now pitching in Toronto instead of Silicon Valley. While geography ties Mexico to the U.S., values are pulling it closer to Canada. Number 4. India is rapidly strengthening ties with Canada in 2025, subtly stepping back from its once warmer relations with the United States. While U.S.-India defense partnerships remain intact, friction has grown around visa restrictions, human rights criticism, and tech regulations. Canada has taken a softer, more collaborative approach, offering India a respectful partnership without public lectures. Over 250,000 Indian students are now enrolled in Canadian universities, the highest in the world. Canada has created a special fast-track residency program for Indian tech professionals. Indian startups are raising funds from Canadian VCs at an increasing pace, especially in AI and green energy. India-Canada bilateral trade crossed $15 billion this year, up 47% from 2023. Canadian universities opened new campuses in Bangalore and Pune. India's middle class is drawn to Canada's healthcare, safety, and career opportunities. Unlike the U.S., which tightened immigration rules post-2024 elections, Canada expanded family reunification pathways. India also praised Canada's diplomatic neutrality in regional conflicts, unlike U.S. interventionist stances. Cultural exchange is thriving. Bollywood films now co-produce with Canadian studios. Canada played a key role in India's G20 economic development proposals. Indian media often compares Canada's stability favorably with America's political volatility. The Indian diaspora in Canada has gained tremendous political influence, fostering stronger diplomatic bridges. Canada invested in India's railway and smart city upgrades this year. Canadian firms are assisting in solar infrastructure projects across rural India. Canada also backs India's bid for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. Indian leaders have commended Canada's quiet power strategy. With growing geopolitical ambitions, India finds in Canada a partner that supports without dominating. Indian public sentiment now views Canada as the most immigrant-friendly country worldwide. This new Indo-Canadian era is defined not by pressure, but by partnership. Number 3. South Africa, long a strategic partner of the United States, is now steadily aligning itself with Canada due to shifting geopolitical dynamics in 2025. The US's failure to address African development priorities has frustrated Pretoria's leaders. Canada, however, has launched a $500 million Africa Investment Fund, with South Africa receiving the lion's share. The two nations are now collaborating on green hydrogen and mineral exploration, tapping into South Africa's vast resources. Canadian mining firms have been welcomed under new ethical investment frameworks. Trade has expanded beyond raw materials into education, renewable tech, and digital services. South African students now make up one of the largest African student populations in Canadian universities. Canada's vocal support for anti-racism and equality resonates with South Africa's historical struggle against apartheid. Ottawa has openly supported South Africa's climate adaptation efforts. The US's travel bans and restrictive visa policies toward African nations have soured relations. In contrast, Canada introduced a special visa program for African entrepreneurs in 2025. The two countries are working on wildlife conservation projects through UNESCO and NGOs. Canadian healthcare firms are investing in rural South African clinics. Johannesburg now hosts a Canadian tech incubation center for African innovation. South African media regularly features Canadian political models as examples of ethical governance. Canada supported South Africa's vaccine rollout far more efficiently than the US during the last pandemic wave. Youth sentiment favors Canada's transparent foreign aid policies over the US's political strings. Canadian tourists are flooding Cape Town and Kruger National Park, boosting local economies. Canada is also helping South Africa upgrade its aging water infrastructure through grant-based funding. South Africa invited Canada to observe its 2025 elections, something never extended to the US. Cultural programs between the two nations have multiplied, especially in literature and music. As Washington grows more inward-looking, South Africa finds in Canada a forward-looking cooperative partner. Number 2. Malaysia is steadily shifting its diplomatic and economic priorities toward Canada in 2025, stepping away from decades of dependence on US trade and military influence. Frustrated by Washington's rigid Indo-Pacific strategies, Kuala Lumpur sees Ottawa as a balanced and respectful partner. Canada recently joined ASEAN dialogues as a strategic observer, strengthening its regional relevance. Malaysian exports to Canada, particularly palm oil, electronics, and rubber goods, have surged by over 30% this year. Canadian tech firms have invested in Malaysia's semiconductor and AI sectors, offering valuable skill exchange. The University of British Columbia now ranks as the top foreign choice for Malaysian students. Tourism is booming, with direct flights from Kuala Lumpur to Vancouver reinstated in early 2025. Canada's Muslim-inclusive immigration policies appeal to Malaysia's majority Muslim population, contrasting the Islamophobia seen in parts of the US. Canadian humanitarian NGOs are highly active in Malaysian flood recovery zones. Joint research on marine biodiversity is ongoing between the two nations. Malaysia now exports halal-certified products to Canadian supermarkets at an unprecedented scale. The US lost credibility in Malaysia after years of drone operations in Southeast Asia. Canada, meanwhile, is seen as a nation that leads with diplomacy, not dominance. Malaysian public trust in Canada rose to 71% in 2025, eclipsing the US at 43%. A Canada-Malaysia Digital Innovation Fund has been launched to boost startup ecosystems. Canadian universities now offer scholarships specifically for Malaysian STEM students. Canada also supports Malaysia's position on the South China Sea conflict with peaceful resolution strategies. Political analysts in Kuala Lumpur commend Canada's non-interventionist approach. Canada's multicultural society is an aspirational model for Malaysians facing ethnic division. Cultural exchanges have expanded through food, music, and film festivals. In a world of shifting alliances, Malaysia is placing its bets on a friendlier, more consistent Canada. Number 1. In 2025, Turkey is re-evaluating its global alliances, and Canada is emerging as a preferred alternative to the increasingly strained relationship with the US. Years of disagreement over Syria, NATO, and US sanctions have made Ankara look elsewhere for partnerships. Canada, seen as more neutral and less imposing, has stepped in with trade opportunities and respectful diplomacy. Turkish students are choosing Canadian universities in record numbers. Over 15,000 new admissions were recorded this year alone. Canada has become a leading investor in Turkish construction and infrastructure, with over 70 new bilateral contracts signed. Turkish Airlines added 4 direct Canadian routes in 2025, reflecting deepening commercial ties. A Canadian cultural center opened in Istanbul, boosting people-to-people connection. Turkey now collaborates with Canada on cybersecurity and tech research initiatives. Canadian visas for Turkish citizens are being processed faster than US ones, drawing more skilled migrants northward. Canada's stance on Turkey's Kurdish issue has been cautiously neutral, earning quiet appreciation from Ankara. Military cooperation includes peacekeeping training and joint disaster response drills. Canada also played a key role in Turkey's 2025 earthquake recovery efforts, providing millions in aid. Turkish media has shifted positively, with Canada enjoying a 67% favorability rating compared to the US's 28%. Trade volumes with Canada have risen by 38% year-on-year. Energy dialogues are also expanding, particularly around clean energy collaboration. Turkish tech startups are receiving Canadian venture capital backing. Turkish and Canadian filmmakers are working on co-productions aimed at both domestic and global audiences. Canada was the first G7 country to back Turkey's bid for regional trade expansion in Central Asia. Canada's quiet diplomacy is praised in Turkish political circles as non-patronizing. Turkish youth consider Canada a safe, open society compared to US racial and gun violence issues. Though still a NATO member, Turkey sees Canada as its modern cooperative ally. With shared economic interests and soft power ties, Turkey's pivot toward Canada is growing stronger by the day. As the world shifts into a new geopolitical era, it's clear that Canada is becoming a rising force in global diplomacy, quiet, consistent, and respectful. These 5 countries, Turkey, Malaysia, South Africa, Mexico, India, aren't turning away from the United States out of hostility, but out of a desire for balance, opportunity, and genuine partnership. Canada offers a future rooted in cooperation, sustainability, and shared growth. In 2025, the world isn't just watching the superpowers, it's realigning with the ones who lead with trust.